Three-Eye Atlas, what we know so far. Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear Leak Project. Today's guest, Keith Hunter. You should check out his website. He's been on Leak Project before. It's been quite a while. It's good to see you again. Time is cruising. Check out his website, lostagesecrets.com. Now, Keith needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one real quick. And today he is going to present what he claims to be proof of the non-random trajectory of the object, Three-Eye Atlas. He says it's undoubtedly a probe of some sort that's passing through the solar system and scanning all the planets in turn as it gets close to them. Also, there could be compelling evidence that Atlas 3I has already caused and triggered X-class solar flares and high-magnitude earthquakes that have occurred just this year. That's just a few of the many points we're going to be discussing today. It is great to see you, Keith. Thanks for the opportunity. How the heck are you?
Yeah, not too bad. It's good to be here. Yeah.
Right on, man. It's been a while. It's so you're in the UK, so it's like 12:41 a.m. where you're at right now.
Yeah.
Wow. That's dedication right there, man.
Yeah, I'm talking about 7 hours in front of you guys at mountain time. Yeah.
Well, super appreciate it. And we have a presentation that we're going to share with you. Keith has put the presentation together, so I'm just going to be asking questions and observing along the way, but I'm really looking forward to this presentation. And I've got an open mind. Definitely have an open mind. Your mind has to be open to work. If it's not open, it doesn't work. It's like a parachute. But if it's too open, then your brain might fall out on the sidewalk and, gets trampled on. So we got to keep an open mind, but we also have to use discernment here. And I'm really looking forward to the information you're going to present with us. Folks, I did real quick before we get started, I wanted to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, Noble Gold Investments. Now, I actually have gold and silver and platinum that I purchased through Noble Gold Investments. I have friends and family that have converted their 401s and IRAs into precious metals as well. And if you have a 401k or an IRA and you convert into precious metals, if you qualify through Noble Gold Investments, you have to let them know Rex from Leak Project sent you. They will gift you 11 ounces of solid silver. Gold and silver is hot, ladies and gentlemen. Don't take my word for it. Look at what the big banks are doing. There's obviously never any guarantees. So you look at what the big money funders are doing. If you convert and you qualify, call them up and find out how. They will gift you a 10-ounce silver American flag bar and a 1-ounce silver American Eagle proof coin at no additional cost. They will give that to you when you convert. Now, gold has gone mainstream. You're probably seeing it everywhere. Prices continue to climb. Every day, more and more Americans are catching on to the power of gold. But how do you actually take advantage of the opportunity? How do you invest in a way that's safe, simple, and built for the long run? That's where Noble Gold Investments comes in. Noble Gold specialists are trained to help investors like yourself go from confused to confident, from wondering what's next to knowing exactly what to do. Whether you're looking to roll over an old 401k into a gold IRA, or you want physical coins and bars mailed directly to your house, Noble Gold makes the process simple, safe, and stress-free. A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. You'll get step-by-step guidance, transparent pricing, and U.S.-based service from a team that's handled over $2.5 billion in precious metal transactions. Noble Gold Investments, their employees are about protecting and growing your wealth, and it isn't just their job, it's their commitment. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com today. That's noblegoldinvestments.com, and claim your free wealth protection kit. Give them a call at 1-877-646-5347. Okay, quick shameless plug. You'll thank me later, folks. You should have listened to me like 5 years ago. Keith, you have a presentation you're going to share with us today.
Yeah. I'll do a bit of an introduction to it before I bring it
Please.
up.
And a quick introduction to you and your website. If you would.
Oh, yeah. My website's called lostagesecrets.com. That's no spaces in between the words. And the main focus of my website, I'm an independent researcher. I've been kind of in this field, in the esoteric field, for about 25 years or so. And I look primarily at things like ancient systems of measure, megalithic monuments, and also the planets kind of fascinate me in Greek mythology. And so I've been interested in discovering what causes, global catastrophe, and looking at planetary alignments. And I've had major presentations I've done with people over years talking about which planetary configurations trigger upheaval and how it's tied in and encoded in mythology. But it's a very exacting science. You can even pinpoint the exact dates and times going back thousands of years. So that's one of the main focus I have. On my website, there's a major series I'm doing on that. We actually talk about the special esoteric calendars that tie together these special alignments, and they're all based upon cycles of like 360 days and 819 days, like Mayan stuff as well. And so that's one of the things I do. But tied into these units of measure we have in terms of time, and tying them together to rare conjunctions that occur, I also look at units of measure in terms of, say, distance units, like imperial measures. And when you are studying like Earth grid patterns and whatever, and connect to megalithic monuments, and you start connecting them via unit measures are based upon like feet and inches and units of measure like miles and geographical miles, which I'll get into in this presentation. You know, you can find that the numeric sequences of units of measure we're familiar with, they very harmoniously tie together various megalithic monuments. But not only that, even top secret like NSA bases around today, you can demonstrate connections to them because they're like rediscovering the science, you know, of the ancients. And even things like nuclear weapons, they're based upon the similar mathematical considerations as the placement of megalithic monuments. And the physics of that, which again I get into in my books you can get from my website, they are the key as well to what I'm going to say about Atlas 3I. I mean, you've given this introduction to say like that I'm suggesting that this Atlas 3I object is potentially going to cause solar flares and even earthquakes on the Earth. Potentially, there are a few critical dates and times of interest that I will present with precision and give you a compelling case why I think that there's a distinct possibility that might happen on the specific dates and times I'm going to suggest. But the most powerful evidence that you might present to persuade somebody that, hey, this object could trigger earthquakes and could trigger a solar flare is for me to demonstrate that it already has. And I am going to show you, I always bring the receipts with this. What I'm not going to present here is like symbology or anything like that. This is physics. This is straight out physics. And you'll see some very precise relations, which if you see them and you pause and you think carefully about them, you'll see how compelling they are. You know, a lot of people out there, when they're looking at the Atlas 3I object, there are a lot of people and they're studying the object itself. So they're like, they're saying things like, well, it's changing to weird colors, or it's got strange shapes when, you know, when some of these objects are viewed up close, and it's got like an inverted cometary tail, and they're saying things like it's not emitting iron, but it's emitting nickel, and things like. They're looking at the object itself and some of the anomalies there, and there's nothing wrong with that. No, don't get me wrong. But if you really want to understand what this object is doing in the solar system, you have to study its trajectory, its hyperbolic trajectory. That is the key to it all, because you will then understand when it's passing through all the planets, right? I'll give you the basic scenario just to set the scene. I mean, if we're all into like UFOs, I'm sure your crowd, you know, your viewers here, we kind of know this kind of stuff. We would readily accept that there are other civilizations out there, and that you can get other civilizations far more advanced than ours that could flick, you know, go between star systems in the proverbial blink of an eye. You know, that wouldn't be an issue. Now, when you look at a probe, which is what I suggest this is, when you look at a kind of object like this, just looking at the actual orbit itself, you're going to say to yourself, well, this object is doing a pass through of our solar system, which means it's in our solar system on the order of a couple of decades or so, right? But it started somewhere at the outer edges, is passing through, and it'll kind of continue on. And you're thinking, well, people have looked at it and they're saying, oh, it's a really fast-moving object right now. Well, okay, but what is it traveling like? Is it 60 kilometers a second or something? There are people who said, okay, if it came from outer space, an interstellar object, which is why it's called Atlas 3I, you know, third interstellar object, they've tried to backtrace where it could have come from. And it would have had to have been traveling for like millions of years from somewhere before it even came here. I personally don't think that scenario is likely. I think this object came into this solar system in the proverbial blink of an eye, but it first arrived somewhere on the outer edges. It then scanned the solar system just to get an understanding where the planets were. It then maneuvered itself into a certain position of approach and picked a very precise hyperbolic trajectory to pass through the solar system. And this takes it within close proximity to some of the key planets, like Mars. It just passed Mars just, a few days ago, whatever, closest approach. It's on point, to get very close to Jupiter as well. But it's getting deep into the inner solar system. And when you study very carefully the critical distances of closest approach to the planets, to the sun, etc., and you look at this from the perspective of what units of measure, in this case, statute miles, as I'll demonstrate, when you start looking at these distances and expressing them in such a unit measures that were familiar to us, you'll realize that the numeric sequences are very spectacular. And you'll be blown away by some of the things I'd like to show you with the ratios, because I've seen some people say things like, oh, it's coming in very close to the ecliptic. The odds of that are 1 in 500. The stuff I'm going to present is orders of magnitude vastly beyond that. It confirms beyond all doubt that it has chosen a single trajectory optimized to pass close to the planets at certain critical distances in order to essentially scan them. And I don't think it's doing it via electromagnetic, like radio waves. So we're not picking up these scans. They're probably, being done via scalar waves. Waves that are basically, if you go by the work of Thomas Bearden, a scalar wave is something generated when you combine electromagnetic waves 180 degrees out of phase. So you cancel the peaks and the troughs of the magnetic and electric fields, but you enfold them. You don't cancel them out to nothing. You create a different type of wave, and it's an enfolded wave. These have the potential to travel far faster than the speed of light, although they can travel at the speed of light, but they're not detectable through normal equipment. You know what I mean? And so I think it is scanning the solar system through resonant agitation. And again, this is revealed when you study the critical distances between the planets that it's approaching, and the physics involved in it. But the distances as well, they are so compelling in that they tie in to solar flares that we've got on record, and even some of the highest magnitude earthquakes that we've had just this year. And this is, when I reveal some of the physics involved, especially the esoteric side of things like nuclear weapons, and some of the physics there, you'll understand some of the science involved and the connections that we have to existing solar flares just from a few months ago, and where Atlas 3I was when they occurred, and then where Atlas 3I will be when it gets close to, say, the sun or Venus or whatever. You'll then say, the relations have a certain affinity. There's a certain configuration that is like replicated that will make you say, this is like an optimum time to create some kind of exotic things. And when I talk about scanning the solar system, what might seem like a mundane scan, well, I believe that this object is resonating the cores, like the sun has a core, a lot shrunken, inside it, and you can look at the Earth's got a core. They're of different radius distances, obviously the physical outer radius. And there's certain ratios that tie together to the core radius distances, which are quite compelling. So I'll get the presentation up then and just go through it. And I'll have to digress just for a few minutes just to say something special about units of measure, because then everything will become clear. Okay, so this is the first slide here. So can you see this on screen?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this then is JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and you see the code name. It says C/2025 N1 Atlas. This is the code name for 3I Atlas, and you can see just to the bottom right there, this is the path of it. It's just approaching Mars, but it's actually just past Mars at the moment. So this is the ephemeris that you get from it, right? Now, I'm going to just, before I explain the significance of the distances that it gets to between the planets, I'm just going to say something about units of measure. And this is from my website, a few slides here. because the numeric values that you're going to get in terms of measure are tied into the ancient Babylonian system, right? So if we just start out here, I think many people may be familiar with the units of angular measure that we have. I can mention, you know, we have 360 degrees to split a circle up. Each degree, 1 degree is equal to 60 minutes of arc, and then 1 minute of arc, 60 seconds of arc. So you could split up, say, a full circle using any of these measures, and they're all at different levels of acuteness, yeah? 360 degrees, 21,600, and then 1.296 million seconds of arc. Now, we can apply these angular measures, and we do apply them to the Earth to derive various unit measures like the geographical mile. So you've got the Earth equatorial circumference here. You can see this figure here, this 131 million feet or so, yeah? I'm giving these values all in feet. If you take that and divide it by the 21,600, you get this value here, 6,087 feet or so. So this is what we call a geographical mile, right? It's on the plane of the equator. You're just splitting it up by 21,600, and you'll have 21,600 units of 6,087 feet, yeah? So this is how we derive it. But going a little bit further here, the Earth once had 360 days per year. And this is one of the things I covered in my book, because there's rates of change I deal with. And it traces back to about 250 million years or so ago. And if you divide the current value for the Earth year, current value today, this 265.24, but by 360, this is the ratio of change in bold here, 1.0145 figure, yeah? But here's the thing. The Earth itself would appear to have increased its equatorial radius. It's got bigger. Just as it was increasing its number of days per year, it's got bigger, and by the same ratio. And this just reveals that the foot unit as we know it is not based upon the current Earth, but upon an ideal Earth. You see, if we take the current value in feet, you can see here this value, my mouse is just hovering around, as I just showed you previously, and divide it by the ratio of change for the Earth year, what you get now is an Earth that is very close. If you look at the sequence, 12959, this number of feet here compares very, very closely to the minutes of arc value, yeah? And if you just go a bit further and divide the number in feet here for the reduced Earth by 21,600, you can see that a geographical mile now is very close to bang on 6,000 feet. And I call this an ideal geographical mile, right? Units of measure of 6,000 feet then. This is what the geographical mile was under an ideal Earth of 360 days per year, right? We had 21,600 units of 6,000 feet. That was the equatorial circumference. So there's something very special about our units of measure, okay? And the Earth year is directly transformed in accordance with its equatorial circumference. Now, I'll just show you. This is one of my books here, The Lost Age of Cosmic Harmony, where I reconstruct the entire solar system. And it's in this chapter 10 here, The Ideal Harmonious Solar System. Just moving on, I'll show you a table from my book. On the right-hand side, you can see the current solar system. These are effectively textbook answers for all the major planets in terms of days of 24 hours exactly, and also the mean distances from the sun to each of these planets in ideal geographical miles of 6,000 feet. And you can see how they all look kind of randomized almost, you know. This is because the solar system has gone out of tune. But when you reconstruct it back, as I do, you can see that we once had, not only did the Earth have 360 days per year, all the other planets had these amazingly harmonious values in terms of days, and the similar kind of sequences as well of the numbers in terms of ideal geographical miles for the mean distance from the sun. So we've got these like special units which seem to be based upon an ideal system. But even though the solar system's gone out of tune almost, and the Earth itself has expanded, these unit measures are still applicable today, and ratios involving them involving these sequences of numbers are also present with regards to things like megalithic monuments and also secret NSA bases. So I'll just give you some examples because these are relevant to Atlas 3I. Take the Great Pyramid. We've done surveys of it, and if you take the 4 sides of them as accurately as we've got in inches, you can see them north, south, east, west here, all about 9,000 or so, 65, 73. The average you can get is 9,069.45. Divide that by 12, you get this 755.78 British feet, yeah? Feet as we understand today, that you guys use in America. Well, here's the interesting thing. The Great Pyramid is located at 29 degrees, 58 minutes, and 51 seconds of arc north. Now, the elliptical arc from the equator up to that particular center point of the pyramid, in feet, you can see it in the value in bold here, this 108,85789. If you take that and divide by the baseline of the Great Pyramid, right, what do you get? You get this sequence, which is almost exactly 14,400. And the reason for this is it's to do with resonance. When you get an object, right, of a certain base dimensions, if you impinge upon it with waveforms and they like fit inside critical dimensions of it in a whole number, you can cause that object to go in a state of like resonant agitation. And the implication is what this is kind of suggesting is that when you have energy waves, as you think of the equator as like a nodal point, and you have energy waves that are emitted from it, yeah, they will harmonize with, say, the center point of the Great Pyramid. They'll fit in. In this case, you could fit the half the base length, effectively we're going 28,800 times, or the full diameter going nearly 14,400 times. But you're talking about wavelengths that would be emitted, that would be somehow based upon the equator, going up to where the pyramid is and harmonizing with it, yeah? And this is part of how it operated as a device. But here's another thing of interest. One of my heroes is Bruce Cathy. I've got some of his books. And he was from New Zealand. He died a few years ago. And he wrote some of his books in the 60s. And he was into Earth energy grid measures. And so he noticed this article in the New Zealand Herald, dated 5th of December 1964. And you can see this image. It's a photograph, right, by a survey ship. I believe the survey ship was called the El Tanin. So it depicted this, and this device, I'd say a device, it was located and surveyed by an underwater, photographs doing deep sea underwater. And this was 13,500 feet underground in 1964. The people were saying there's no way this was put there by, humans. We didn't put it there. But you can see all the weird crossbars from it. And from that, I mean, even in this article, they gave, amazingly enough, the coordinates of it. They disclosed them, 59 degrees, 8 minutes south, longitude, 105 degrees west. And you can see all the crossbars. So Cathy, if you look to the right here, he derived this Earth energy grid matrix, right, by looking at the pathways through these crossbars and constructed that. And he thought it was tied into the Earth's magnetic field. It's actually a grid system which is hanging upon many megalithic monuments, as a cuboid matrix. It's, and the Great Pyramid is one such example. So just to give you an indication of, again, showing how special feet units are. If you look at the El Tanin aerial and you go southwards from the equator, 59 degrees, 8 minutes south, you get the answer in feet. You can see it there. And if you look at the Great Pyramid up to the north, the value I've already shown you, it's this 108.8. Now, if you add these two together to figure out the separation between them, the elliptical separation, you get practically dead on this sequence here, 32.4 million feet. And the error rate is only 30 feet or so. And so you can see how the foot unit seems to harmonize quite brilliantly in this, 324, and then you got like 5 zeros after it. You can see how these special kinds of numbers are present there. And it implies that when you are trying to look at setting up distances between special objects, you want to use, numeric sequences based upon feet and scaled up, if you will, harmonically, that fit a whole number of times in. and it's all to do with the physics in play. But this example I'm showing you here is the Great Pyramid linked to an unusual alien artifact. But let's look at something a bit more modern. This is an NSA base, Pine Gap, Australia. And you can see here, this is from Google Earth, practically the dead center of that largest building right there in the center point is latitude 23 degrees, 47 minutes and 57 seconds of arc. And this is one of these facilities where it's supposedly a signals intelligence type thing. It's got these big radomes like the big golf balls, and it was set up in 1966 in Australia. A similar site to this one exists in the UK, in Menwith Hill, and you also have a few in the US. You've got these like international things. But here's the thing: if you look at the latitude arc from the equator down, to the coordinates of the center of the pyramid, to the center of the main building, you get the following. The latitude arc would appear to be very close to, you can see the value 8.64 million feet. And if you divide that by 6,000, an ideal geographical mile, you can see that it's practically dead on 1,440 feet. So you're thinking, why are they using unit measures like the feet so harmoniously to offset things from the equator, So you can see there's something very special about the foot unit and also 6,000 feet as a unit, right? These units here then are very special. And the metric system that the French came with based on kilometers and meters, that is a worthless system compared to imperial measures, right? These units are very special. But not only that, the unit that we are far more familiar with is the statute mile. This is the mile that we have on all our road signs in Britain and you guys have in America, 5,280 feet. Now, this might seem like a strange, distance unit, but this distance unit harmonizes quite well with certain celestial bodies as they exist right now. And I've already said that some of them have changed their sizes. The sun has increased, the moon has decreased. So if we look at the sun and the moon in terms of statute miles, here's an interesting point. The sun's radius, you can see that the textbook answer is the one at the top. It's 432,163 miles or so. Very close.
Sacred number, 432.
Yeah. You can see how it's very close to 432,000 statute miles exactly. And then you've got the moon almost dead on 1,080 miles. Again, the textbook answer for the equator, very close to. So you can see, you're thinking, wow. So we know that there's something very special about feet units and also ideal geographical miles of 6,000 feet and statute miles, as you can see here. Now, let's go to Atlas, because now everything is going to make sense, okay? What you're looking at is a Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they have all the coordinates of it, the whole ephemeris, so they've worked out in detail its orbital trajectory. And what I'm going to show using their own information, right? If you just look at this basic slide here, this is the path from their little applet. And this white line is its pass-through, It's just approaching Mars here, but as we all know, it's just gone past Mars a couple of days or so. It's about here somewhere, And you can see where Jupiter is. When it passes and it gets to this point here, where it gets to Jupiter's orbit, Jupiter will be about here. It'll have just gone past slightly, so it'll be very close. But as it's coming in, you will also have certain critical points of approach to all these bodies, to Mercury, Venus, Earth, and the Sun, okay? And it's so fascinating when you look at the distances of separation, the closest points of approach to all these bodies here, expressed in statute miles. And let's be very precise about this. I'm not making up these numbers. I refer you to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's own system, right? So if you go to the Horizon system, same website, and you see you can select as target body Atlas 3I, which is this C2025N1, and you can set observer location, in this case, the sun. And you can use that little applet thing to, approximate when its closest point of approach is. And then you specify the time. And you can see the steps here. You can do it to minutes of accuracy, okay? And so here then, if you run a search, separation of Atlas 3I and the sun, and you do it between 29th and 30th of October this month, if you generate the ephemeris, you press that button, you'll get something like this. Now, you get a big dollop of information, but you will notice this highlighted line here. And I've also highlighted the distance unit. This is the critical column here, distance AU. AU is 1 astronomical unit, which is the mean distance between the Earth and the Sun. And I'm going to give you the exact textbook answer for that shortly. But what you'll notice here, you'll see all these values here, 1.35, 1.3, these are all the values for the distance of separation between Atlas 3I and the Sun. And you'll notice that the highlighted little line here is the minimum distance. All the values above it are slightly higher, and all the values below it are slightly higher, right? And if you just look here where it says 4664, just above it's 4710, and then just below it 4665. So this here to the nearest minute is the distance, the minimum separation, that is the closest point of approach to the Sun at 11 hours 44 minutes universal time in astronomical units. Yeah. So all I'm going to do then, I'm just going to show you, I've run searches just like this one, and I'm going to show you what the distances are separating Atlas 3I and all the main bodies in the solar system I've just shown you at their closest points of approach. And these are the values from JPL. Not me. I'm not making this up. This is their values. I'm just going to show you what they are and let you make up your own mind. So, firstly, the closest approach to Mars. This occurred 3rd of October, right? Just a few days ago now. And it occurred 4 hours, 38 minutes, universal time. From that similar kind of search I just showed you for the Sun, the distance in astronomical units is this one here, this 0.19356, yeah? 1 astronomical unit is a textbook answer. You can see it at the bottom in the corner here, 1 AU. It's 92,955,807.267 miles, a very precise figure. So all we need to do then is just multiply 1 AU by the distance in AU, and it tells us what the distance is of closest approach to Mars. And the answer is this. And you can see that it's practically dead on 18 million miles, yeah, as an ideal. And the discrepancy is only 1,509, 89 miles or whatever, yeah. I think that's like less than the radius of Mars itself, yeah. And you're thinking, that is quite amazing, But let's go on. Closest approach point to Jupiter. This is going to occur 16th of March, 2026, 12 hours, 18 minutes. There's the distance between them in terms of astronomical units. Multiply that by 1 AU, and here's the distance. Closest approach is that, 33329. And what does that look almost exactly like? An ideal of essentially all threes, 33,333,333 miles. You think it's very uncanny. And the discrepancy is only about 4,000 miles. These little discrepancies I'm showing you here, and I will give you the table with the percentage errors, I assure you, they are fractions of 1%. And they're uncanny. But let's go on. What about closest approach to Mercury? This is on the 8th of October. And I'm just wondering, was this 2 days ago? Okay. 2 hours, 43 minutes universal time. You can see the image here. Closest approach there. What is the distance? That. And what is that close to? Practically dead on 108 million miles. Remember the moon's radius? 1,080. And here you've got, again, the sequence. It's like, wow. Error rate, 1,000. Sorry, the error rate is just 10,000 miles or so.
So Keith, let me jump in. Jump in. Why is this significant in it being artificial or intelligent design versus a typical comet?
Well, just look at it from this perspective, right? Statute miles, right? Would an alien civilization be using them?
I don't know.
Well, you see, that's the key thing here. How can it be that the closest approach points, when expressed in statute miles, seem to harmonize to these figures, like begin 108 or, 333, or, the values I'm showing you here, they harmonize quite brilliantly to these values with only slight error. It makes me think, like I said about universal measures, this alien civilization seems to be employing statute miles for some reason, because if they were just using some random kind of, distance measures, we wouldn't see anything like this. Like with the astronomical units, distances, if you just looked at that sequence there and said, oh, that's the distance between it, it almost looks random. But when you're using statute miles, the numbers do not appear random. Do you know what I mean? So
you think they're like putting in a GPS, it's like a GPS system, and they're using specific coordinates based upon their technologies versus it just being natural, interstellar object flying through the solar system at 120,000 miles an hour approximately. It's more like a guidance system, you see it as.
Well, look at, I was talking about the Great Pyramid, and I was talking about the distances between, the equator up to the pyramid. And I'm saying you've got these fits, like the radius or the baseline of the object harmoniously fits in. When you are using unit measures like this, they're not arbitrary distance units, feet and miles and, geographical miles or statute miles. They're wavelength measures. And so if you wanted to stimulate an object through resonance, you would want to be using these kinds of sequences of approach, knowing that they're of a special set, a special series of wavelengths. It's like when we think about colors or whatever, certain colors have very precise frequencies and wavelengths to them. And if you increase the wavelength or decrease it, you shift colors. There's something special about certain wavelength measures. There's something very special about these distance measures here. And the way in which these values just correspond to one another, again, like I was talking about that guy who said that he thought that the Atlas 3I was, going very close to the plane of the ecliptic, and the odds of that are 1 in 500. When you see, values like this present, I'm saying that this is vastly superior, improving an intent. Why would they have these values of this, Let me just show you the rest of them and then the ratios, and maybe it'll become a bit clearer. Yeah.
Great.
Because if we go here, the closest approach to Saturn, this is actually something that occurred 29th of May earlier this year, before we'd even found it. And the distance here in miles is, you can see this 9251. Now, again, it almost looks random. But if you take the reciprocal, if you do the equation 1 divided by this value here, you get this 1 divided, and you see the sequence 1.07997 times 10 to the 9. That again is a sequence. It's practically dead on like 108 sequence that we've just seen, So if you just use it as 108 as an ideal and reverse it, you effectively get this value here. It's 925, 925, 925 miles. And again, very, very close to the actual sequence here. Very slight error rate. And just one final one, Atlas to the Sun. And this is where things get really interesting, because I'm going to raise a point here, which I'm going to elaborate on a bit later on. But if you look at the distance then between Atlas 3I and the Sun, at the closest approach point of the Sun, you'll find that the answer is about 126,087,761 miles. And you ask yourself, what would be the ideal of this? And the answer is the answer is 126 million miles exactly. So this got me thinking, because we're talking about the distance between 3I Atlas and the center of the Sun, right? And the Sun, as I've just shown you, is a massive body, and its radius is about 432,000 miles. So this discrepancy of about 87,000 miles or so, this discrepancy is quite significant. It would occur, did I say, within the Sun. So this got me thinking, if we go to NASA's website and we look at the layers of the Sun, right, here is what NASA has to say about the Sun. You can see this 432,000 miles, that's the radius of it. But look at the radius of the core, 86,000 miles, right? Now, 86,000 miles, obviously, if you go back here, that little discrepancy is about 87,000 miles from this ideal of 126 million miles. And this tells me, it suggests that there's something special about Atlas 3I. Its approach distance, the ideal it's trying to achieve, is not between necessarily Atlas 3I center to the center of the sun, but to the outer edge of the core. And this has quite some implications. But let me just show you the values from what I've just shown you so far. All the distances in miles from Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Sun, and Jupiter, they're right here. And these are all the ideal values. And now you see the errors in miles, and the final two columns, and the percentage errors. And the percentage errors, right, from the ideal to the actual, they are fractions of 1%. And then just have a look at the ratios between them, right? And consider this very carefully for all your viewers watching. Closest approach ratios, Mercury and Mars. So it gets to Mars 3rd of October, 4:38, and achieves this distance here, okay, nearly 18 million miles. It then goes on 5 days later to get to its closest approach to Mercury, almost 108 million. And the ratio between them, as you can see, 5.9989. It's almost dead on, like 6-1. Now ask yourself a question. If this is an object that has just some random trajectory, why would it have such exacting ratios existing between the planets when it gets the closest approach points? It's just not possible for that to be random. And if you look at the Sun and Mars, again, the ratio from the outer edge of the core, as I've just elaborated on, and Mars itself, ratio practically dead on, 7-1. Incredible accuracy. And then you've got Jupiter and Saturn. Think on this one. The closest approach distance is here. Look at the sequence for the ratio, 0.03599. It's practically dead on 0.36. And what is the primary number of the base 60 system? You've got 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Extreme precision. And then again, the one here, Mercury and Jupiter, 3.24 ratio between them. Remember that value of the separation between the El Tanin Aerial and the Great Pyramid? It was 32,400,000 feet, yeah? 324. And you can see right here. These relations just right here confirm that this object has very carefully selected its trajectory into the solar system. It wants to get close to the planets, and the ratios between the closest points of approach are absolutely incredibly accurate to these basic values here. And this is no accident. It's no accident because units of measure of statute miles, right, that we use and that you can see here, these are like tied into special wavelength units. And this is what's tied into some of this secret physics of resonant agitation and nuclear weapons. And this is why you can demonstrate connections between Atlas 3I and things like solar flares. But let's just continue on, because I haven't mentioned the Earth and Venus. And these are the two critical planets there I want to just touch on here. So you've got the closest approach to Venus occurs 3rd of November, 2025, 5 hours 56 universal time. That yellow line there is the distance then between Atlas 3I and Venus. But it's also important that the distance between Atlas 3I and the Earth at the same time is also quite crucial. If you take the distances, right, at the same time, what are the distances? The red and the yellow line right there, and you do the ratio between them. The sequence is practically dead on 0.288. Practically dead on, okay? But there's more. I mean, if you just note 0.288 divided by it is 0.036. Same ratios between Jupiter and Saturn. There is no way that this object has got a random trajectory when you consider the exactness of all these, ratios with this affinity, right? If you look to the next point, though, we're now going to introduce the speed of light. There's Venus, the distance then of closest approach. That there is the speed of light in miles per second. That's the standard textbook answer in vacuum. So if you do a simple division, it's 324.06. So it would take 324 seconds effectively for light to cover the distance to Venus. Again, chance? I don't think so. I don't think so. And again, just to remind you, the ratio 3.24 was between Mercury and Jupiter, right? So again, very fascinating. But let's look more about this closest approach to the sun, because a lot of people are looking at this. And you know that Avi Loeb guy? Is that his name? Avi Loeb? Harvard.
Professor Avi Loeb, yeah.
Yeah, the guy there. I've been watching quite a few interviews on him, and he was saying that there was somebody that was somebody who contacted him who was trading stocks, and options for like shares, and they'd got them all to expire, at the point when Atlas 3I gets to the sun on 29th of October. And you've got to think to yourself, what is it that these, I don't know, masters of the universe type people know, these stock traders, And I kind of think that they are operating on a certain kind of knowledge, and they may well be aware of all the calculations I'm going to present to you. So what is so special about this point of closest approach to the sun? Well, there you've got NASA's estimate for the core radius, yeah? On that time period there, the distance between Atlas 3I and the edge of the sun's core, as I just showed you previously, is about 126 million miles exact. Very close. NASA's estimate, though, for the radius of the core is 86,000 miles. Well, you can actually use the speed of light here to derive what I think is the best estimate for the radius of the core. I think they're tied together. And it uses one of these special values of the base 60 system, yeah? If you divide the speed of light by 2.16, 216, if you divide it by 6, you get 36, yeah? That sequence. But if you divide it by 216, you get this value here, 86,241. In this case, assuming it as a distance of miles, this is what appears to be the most exacting value for the sun's core, yeah, in terms of its radius, as I believe is correctly tied into the speed of light. Now, here's the interesting thing then. If you use this value here and add it precisely to 126 million, you now get Atlas 3I to the sun's center. And if you then divide by this radius of the core, look at what value you get here, 1462.007. In other words, the radius of the sun's core fits into the distance between Atlas 3I and the center of the sun practically dead on a harmonious number of times, 1461 times. So that thing I was talking about with the Great Pyramid, if you're going to transmit waves of energy, okay, to stimulate something, and you get to a certain distance, like with the Great Pyramid, it says, position yourself on the equator. If you emit a certain wave of a wavelength, which is the baseline dimension, or the half the baseline of the Great Pyramid, it will harmoniously, fit within right up to the center point of the Great Pyramid. In that case, it will be 28,800 times. You're looking at something similar here. The implication of what it's saying is, if Atlas 3I were emitting energy waves and it got to this distance of closest approach to the sun, and it were to emit an energy wave whose wavelength was this 86,241, yeah, it would have exactly 1462 that would take it all the way to the center of the sun, but it would also harmonize twice, fitting in to the sun's full diameter twice, or the radius once. This is the kind of mathematics that it suggests stimulation of some sort. And here's one little interesting point. Although it fits in 1462 times, that same radius value of the sun's core fits into 126 million miles 1461 times, okay? So what is 1461 divided by 4? The Earth year sequence. You can see here it's very closely related to the sidereal year, but it could also be close to the tropical year. So this is all very, very fascinating. And it tells me, at least to this point in the little study here, that there is some kind of suggestion here that when Atlas 3I gets its closest approach to the sun, is going to emit some kind of waveform. And again, I don't believe it'll be electromagnetic, maybe scalar. And the wavelength selected will be some harmonic of the sun's core. And this will cause some kind of stimulation of the sun. And it could be a mundane scientific scan. It might be a way of interstellar communication using the sun as a kind of beacon in some way. But it could also be something that could trigger resonant agitation, causing the sun to increase its activity, maybe even trigger a solar flare or a CME event. And to understand the mathematics of this one more, you need to go to this one. This is my second book that I told you about. Ancient Megaliths, Covert Military Bases and Nuclear Weapons. And the biggest chapter in this book is The Secret Physics of Nuclear Weapons, where I discuss a variety of nuclear weapons. And I point towards a certain classified aspect of this technology, which is like very rarely spoken about. Okay. And it's all to do with the fact that nuclear weapons make use of the position of the sun itself in order to boost the energy yields. So here's from the United States Declassified Nuclear Archives. And I want to draw your attention to the device called King. It's the Ivy series, number 34, Ivy King. And then at the bottom nearly, you can see highlighted Castle Bravo. The King device is the highest yield pure fission device ever tested by the US. 500,000 kilotons, or 500,000 tons or 500 kilotons of TNT. And Castle Bravo was 15 megatons, highest yield test ever conducted by the US. And we've got the precise times of them. And so I just want to show you something very fascinating about these devices, because this is critical to understanding the whole connection of Atlas 3I to solar flares. This here then is for King, and it was a test conducted 15th of November 1952, 23 hours, 30 minutes universal time. And here's the thing about it. You can work out for a given time the position of the sun mapped onto the Earth. In other words, if you freeze time and draw a straight line from the center of the sun to the center of the Earth, it will pierce through the surface of the Earth, and that will give you like the ground coordinates of the sun. In this case, it's about 18.78 south, 176.315 west. And so you can see here, this little blob here, the yellow blob, that's the ground location of the sun. And there is the bomb location coordinates, right? And this is at the precise moment the device was activated at this time. And so you have this instantaneous great circle arc of separation, right? And it's this figure here, this 13.4 million feet or so. So that's what you had for King, okay? Bear with me a moment. Same deal. This is for Bravo. You've got the bomb coordinates and the sun coordinates, right? There's the bomb location red, the sun ground position there, coordinates there, 8 degrees south, 98 west or so. But again, you can work out very accurately the great circle arc connecting up the two. Now here's where it gets interesting. Castle Bravo, as I said, 2 years later, this was 1954. King, 1952. If you look at both of them and you do a nice little division sum of these very precise values, these arc lengths, separating the bomb position to the sun, the answer is this amazing fraction, practically dead on 8 divided by 3. And the discrepancy is 206 miles, right? And this is using accurate Earth ellipsoid models, US Navy's own ICE software, that's the Interactive Computer Ephemeris, and their own calculations for the ellipsoid model to work in the declassified archive. So these figures are very exact. Now, what does this mean, though? What does it mean? Most people think of nuclear weapons as a device that everything to produce the Big Bang occurs by the reactions that occur in the device itself when you cause it to go into chain reaction and you have a certain amount of, say, plutonium, that there's a fission involved, splitting the atom, cascading effect. But the thing about nuclear weapons is there actually is a process modified by external forces, literally celestial ground positions of such as the sun, the moon on the ground relative to the position of the devices affects how clean the reaction is. It affects the yield. And so they were actually, when they were doing lots of these tests for nuclear devices, they were actually making sure that the sun was a certain number of, a certain arc length distance of the surface of the Earth relative to device. And they used certain critical wavelength measures. So in this case, what they did for King was they took the separation distance between the bomb and the sun and divided it by 3. And then they said, this divided by 3 distance is a critical wavelength measure, right, which connects up energetically the bomb to the sun. So they took that critical wavelength measure and then they multiplied it by 8. And then they said, we're going to do another test in 1954, and we're going to set up the coordinates of where the bomb is going to be. And we are literally going to wait until the Earth rotates around so the sun fleetingly gets to this critical distance, this 35.8 million miles. When it gets to that, 8 times this fundamental unit, they then triggered the device. Why? Because energetically it would be boosted. And this is what they were doing here. They got a fundamental unit wavelength which fitted a whole number of times into the King test, and then fitted a whole number of times connecting the sun to Bravo. You can see the physics involved. This is an aspect of nuclear weapons, and you can look at many tests as I do in my book and reveal this. Now, how does this apply to Atlas 3I? Let's have a look at solar flares. So you can see here then, this is from spaceweatherlive.com, right? Top 50 solar flares of 2025. And I've highlighted one here in that blue box, the third most powerful, an X 1.9 flare. And it occurred on 19th of June. And you'll also notice there's 3 little columns, start, maximum, and end. The start column is the time to the nearest minute when the sun started to get all agitated, right? And it builds up, and then in this case, 30 minutes later, the flare releases. That's the 2350 time, the maximum, yeah? But look at the time then when the agitation starts. Because we've got a precise date and time, we can actually go straight back to JPL and figure out where Atlas 3 was relative to the sun at that time. And the answer is this. 19th of June, 2337. You can see the distance in AU here in the final column, 4.88 so AU. Multiply that by 1 astronomical unit, and in red here, we have the distance between Atlas 3I and the sun when the activity started to the nearest minute of that solar flare, right? There's a separation distance between them. So there it is. Now we're going to look at that value compared to this. Remember that value there. When Atlas reaches, it has yet to achieve it, but on 29th of this month, 11 hours 44 minutes, the distance separating Atlas 3I and the center of the sun is this figure in orange, yeah? That precise figure, right? Time of closest approach to the sun's center. So there is that figure that we've just seen, right? So that figure there, that 45,390 figure, that is the distance in miles between Atlas and the sun at the time the solar flare activity started. The other figure in orange is the distance between Atlas 3 and the sun that will be achieved October 29th. And a simple division of these figures reveals the following. Practically dead on 3.6. The error rate, a couple of 100 feet, okay? Now, remember what I was talking about when I said about King and Bravo, and I said, what were they doing? They had this distance connecting up the sun to the bomb for King. They divided it by 3. They multiplied it by 8 to get another viable distance to boost their energy yield for Bravo. In this case here, 18 divided by 5, if you do it on your calculator, 18 divided by 5 is 3.6. So this means that if you like take this figure here, this 45, 3, whatever, if you divide that by 18 and then multiply it by 5, you get this 126 figure. What's the implication? Again, it implies resonance. It's basically saying, hey, there's something special about the wavelength units here. right, that fit in. If we take the value, one of these values, the biggest one, divide by 18, you get the same answer as if you took the smallest value, 126 sequence, divided by 5. You're dealing with a fundamental unit that fits harmoniously into both. And so they're thinking, if this Atlas 3I somehow stimulated the sun with the correct wavelength measure to give us that X-class solar flare, then when it gets to its closest approach to the sun, you have a distance which again is viable. The suggestion is when it gets there, it may well trigger another solar flare. Does that make sense?
It does. And for those that are just joining us, there's a lot of people that are just jumping in. Could you give them a quick summary so they could catch up to us here about why you see these numbers as being so significant and validating your theory that this is not just a flying ice ball? There's actually a lot more to it.
Like the elegance,
extraterrestrial technology,
yeah,
or some breakaway civilization from Earth millions of years ago that decided to build a spaceship the size of Manhattan and take off. And they're like, well, we need to go see how our, how everybody's doing, how our experiment's doing out there on Earth. They're going to need us right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, the elegance and the precision of the numbers and the ratios and how they tie together, as I said, like things like the Great Pyramid, like the Pine Gap bases. I mean, for those just joining, I mean, obviously they'll rewind, but basically what I'm demonstrating is that there are critical distances separating Atlas 3I from the sun. So far, I've just given this one here. I'm going to give more. But the critical distances separating Atlas 3I and the sun when we have a massive X-class solar flare, and that the distance in question here are tied in strongly to very precise ratios using the values of like the base 6 system. In this case, the sequence 3.6 is 3.6 divided by 6 is 6, it's the prime number of the base 6 system. You can see that these ratios here imply that if you can energetically stimulate something at one point with a unit measure, a distance between Atlas and the sun, then a major ratio associated with that you will achieve later on, rather another distance separating Atlas 3 and the sun tied with a major ratio. It implies that there's a certain physics in place here, that wavelengths are being selectively chosen, because if they were sent on their way, if Atlas 3I was stimulating the sun by emitting wavelengths, and again, I don't think of the electromagnetic spectrum, you're not going to pick them up, but there'll be scalar waves, I'd imagine. And they're choosing wavelengths which harmonize to, say, the sun's core, and they're also harmonizing to the distance between Atlas 3I and the sun at critical points. And I think this is the kind of physics here which is very decisive. This is the kind of thing that makes me think that when Atlas 3I gets to its closest approach to the sun, it's going to scan the sun. Will that scan be of such a heightened nature that it will trigger something like an X-class solar flare? This mathematics suggests it could very well, But let me show you about the Earth, because I've also done some research and looking at the Earth as well. And I think that Atlas 3I has been responsible for causing major earthquakes. So let's just look at the core of the Earth. I've looked at the core of the sun, about 86,200 miles or so. Here, the core of the Earth, you've got 756 miles. That's the radius, right? That's the radius of the core. Now, bearing that in mind, then, let's look at this. Now, I've always told you, shown you, that the time in question, the distance separating the Earth and Atlas 3I at this time, 3rd of November, 5:56 universal time, is this distance here, okay? It's about 209.6 million miles. Now, even though that's the distance separating the Earth and Atlas 3I, it's actually, the time is when Venus is at its closest approach, right? So just to show you the slide here, this is what we're looking at, right? 3rd of November, 2025, 5:56. This is when Atlas, in that yellow line, is closest to Venus. But even so, I'm interested in the distance between the Earth and Atlas 3I at that same time. So it's not at its closest approach to the Earth, But you know how there's this ratio of 2.88, is 0.288 separating them. Both of these distances are significant, and we're going to concentrate upon the Earth separation here, okay? So if we've got that distance there and we divide by the Earth's core, okay, we'll get this ratio here. It looks almost random, but if you successively divide it by 4, just let's scale down quickly, you find you're part of this sequence here that goes all the way to 1080. Remember the radius of the moon? 1080 miles. In this case here, when you scale down the numeric sequence, you get that. The ideal is, of course, this sequence here. Now, what adjustment, what kind of error rate would we have here?
Well, can I ask just a real quick question? Because this person's asked this question like 5 times, and they're asking why you're dividing by 4.
I'm just using it as a number to scale down. Remember, we're talking about wavelengths that fit a whole number of times into.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That's all it is, basically. You know?
Okay.
And just to show you that we're a part of one of these sequences, which there's nothing more than that. It's just about wavelength, shortening or harmonics.
Cool. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, and I think that answers the question. So thank you very much.
That's all it is. I'm just showing you that these numbers are effectively not just random, but tied into these numeric sequences, which are quite significant, and tied into, again, all based upon ratios that link to units of like statute miles and ideal geographical miles. But just for this sequence here, then, what would make this sequence here, this ideal sequence, perfect? If we were to adjust the Earth's core, instead of the radius being 758 miles dead on, if it were 758.154 miles, and you did the division sum by that distance, you get this sequence exactly. So what I'm kind of pointing at here is that just like with the radius of the sun's core, to the distance between Atlas 3I and the sun at its closest approach, you've got something similar going on here between distance of Atlas 3I to the Earth in terms of also linking to the Earth's radius. So let me show you how this relates to earthquakes. This here is a list of the most powerful earthquakes that have occurred so far this year, right? So if you put in on USGS, US Geological Survey, a search for 1st of January this year, right to present, these are the top 5 ones that pop up, right? And I want to draw your attention to these 2 here, the most powerful, and then the 7.5 one. So let's have a look at this one here. That time separation that's going to be achieved between Atlas 3I and the Earth, 3rd of November, right? That's the value in yellow, right? And again, using the JPL thing, when we get to the earthquake databases, we work out the times. We look at the times given from USGS for when the earthquakes occurred, put the same times into JPL to figure out the distance of Atlas to various bodies. We find that when the 8.8 magnitude earthquake occurred, 29th of July, 2325, the distance between Atlas and the Earth was this figure in this light blue, this 264 sequence 1, yes? And likewise, we've got the figure, the 7.5 magnitude earthquake, when that occurred, this is between Atlas and the Sun, was this figure here, this is like pale reddish one, 262 figure. So let's just look at these first of all. A simple ratio between the 8.8 magnitude earthquake and the distance between Atlas and the Earth, as will be achieved 3rd of November. You can see the sequence here. It looks random, but the ideal is this. You see how it begins 1.2597, and this is 1.2597. It terminates 1, 2 as the ideal. And if you, again, this case successively divide by 3, you get that sequence. And just look at the numbers in red, just to this point here. You see how it ends, 46656. That there, if we continue further but divided by 6, we're writing the primary value that goes all the way to 36, okay? Again, I'm just demonstrating that the sequence of values is not random. But I'll just give you
one. Why are these numbers ideal? And sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, these numbers, as I said, all I'm showing you are that the values, the ratios between these critical straight line distances, right, they conform to basic ratios, right? And like I've been saying with that, the Great Pyramid and the nuclear weapons as tests, you see these sequences here, and they're suggestive of the fact that the distances between these, Atlas 3I and, say, the Earth or the Sun, why do they conform to values which are of these basic sequences with high precision? That's what I'm really getting at here, They imply that we're dealing with the physics of resonance because we're dealing with ratios. As a most basic example, this is the main one. This one here, where are we? There. We've got, I'm going a bit further on here. Let's have a look here. We got to that point there, and what I was going to show you was this one here. Here we've got in yellow the value here. This is the distance again, Atlas and the Earth, yellow. And if we divide it by the 7.5 magnitude earthquake, right, that's what the value was between Atlas and the Sun. The simple division sum is that practically dead on 0.8. Again, 4/5. And I put it to you, why would that exist? And again, I give you the example of the nuclear weapons. It seems to suggest that there's some kind of causal link between Atlas and that 7.5 magnitude earthquake. It was at this critical distance, this 262 miles one, this one here, at the time when the earthquake was registered. And then you think to yourself, when we get to this critical distance here, right, this time period here, when it actually is the time of Venus's close approach, but that distance in yellow is the separation distance between Atlas 3I and the Earth. Why would we have a ratio of 4/5 practically dead on? Again, it implies that Atlas 3I, when it gets to 3rd of November, is going to do some kind of resonance scan using a certain wavelength, which is going to harmonize with the core and which may well trigger another earthquake, because I do think there's some kind of causal trigger connection between the ones already done. And so this is what I'm trying to basically get at. And I'll just give you one final thing here. This here is the most powerful solar flare, the X 2.7 one that's occurred this year. The starting time is 8:04, right? So if we're here, again, a simple ratio between these two figures, and we get the following. If you look at that sequence again, just take the first, those 5 numbers there, and just after them, 3.36864, and there's a 0. You can see it there. Very accurate. If we just step down, successively divide by 4, just for simplicity, you find that you go all the way to this sequence again. You're going all the way to number 36. You're basically, again, you're just stepping down. What this means is that the ratio, this value, 0.36864, that is a ratio 1152/3125. And what that means is, if you were to say take the value in yellow here, the distance between Atlas 3I and the Earth, 3rd November, divide it by 1152, and then separately take this value here, distance between Atlas and the Sun, when that X 2.7 flare occurred, and divide that by 3,125, you get the same value. And that value is actually very close to the speed of light value. It's only about 4,300 miles less than, okay? So we just get to the final slide here, which is just this. And this is all I wanted to put out there and just say that based upon these relations as I've shown you here, when we get to these 2 dates, when we get to the Sun's closest approach with Atlas 3I, 29th of October, 1144, then I think that we could see a resonant stimulation of the Sun, which may trigger either a solar flare, an X-class, or possibly even an earthquake on the Earth. You see, both of these times either could occur on either of these days. You could get solar flare activity or some sort of high magnitude earthquake. I would suggest that they are possible. They are they're inferred. They are very suggestive, by the mathematics of these relations, that these are dates of concern. We will know, obviously, with the next few weeks whether anything happens on these dates or nothing could happen. All I'm saying is these dates, energetically, they are viable. The question is, will they be used? Will they be taken advantage of these configurations? Will Atlas 3I trigger something quite significant? We'll have to wait and see. Again, it's very speculative, but the mathematics is highly suggestive based upon the physics of, say, nuclear weapons, So that's basically the entire presentation, If you just do want to know more about the physics, then I suggest going to my website, Lost Age Secrets, and if you scroll down the home page, these two books here reveal a lot more about the physics of what I'm saying in this presentation. The first one, Lost Age of Cosmic Harmony, that one tells you all about the ideal units of measure, the transformation of the solar system. And this one here looks at the nuclear weapons. The one I just gave you with Castle Bravo and Ivy King, along with other nuclear weapons, are discussed, and also the relations of the Great Pyramid and resonance, which I've only just briefly, touched upon. They're in that one there. But basically, that's the presentation. I can stop sharing screen now, actually. But yeah, so that's essentially it. I mean, does that make sense to you? Do you understand where I'm coming? I know it's a lot to take in mathematics-wise, and you've got to ponder it. I can't hear you. You're muted, Rex. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You're muted. I say you're muted.
Read my lips. More taxes. I mean, no more taxes. Yeah. Okay, we've got sound. So I understood a lot of it. I didn't understand all of it. I'm definitely going to need to go back and watch it again because there's a lot of stuff there, and I'm doing my best to answer some questions in the chat while I'm listening to you, and I got to stay 100% focused on what you're talking about. So let's take some questions from the chat. Let's see what we're going to take questions, folks. I know you've had a lot of questions throughout, so now here's your opportunity. Instead of calling in, you can just leave a text in the chat and we'll get to it. So let's see here. Rex, no sound. Rex, you're a moron. You have no sound. Rex. I know. All right. So has anyone heard about all the strange sightings in New York? Okay. So that would be a different question. Willie said, brilliant speech. Mark says the other guy's ratio is about religion. It's interesting because we had a guest on earlier that was connecting a lot of the religious dates to locations of 3i Atlas, which I thought was very compelling. What was the most aha moment for you, Keith, with 3i Atlas? Like, what made you just go, wow, okay, this is more than a flying ice ball in space?
Well, as I said, it's a study of the trajectory. I mean, because I look technically at things like when I look at Earth grid measures and I look at things like, well, here's the exact placement of, say, the Great Pyramid, here's the exact placement of Pine Gap military base, and I work out the coordinates and the arc measures, and I see so many ratios connecting them together, interconnected to various things. And I see things like with the nuclear weapons, ratios interconnecting them, implying that there's something special about how they function. So, I mean, I've looked into things like earthquakes forecasting before. There's a few discoveries I've made in that area, and also solar flares. I've even looked at like that X28 flare from, I think it's 2003. Mm-hmm. And they are related to the positions of the planets, the Earth, the Moon, and they are precisely triggered. You see, I talk about cycles of destruction, and the effects are many and varied. You can get resonant agitation of the solar system as a whole. So you can get seismic activity globally on the Earth, massive tectonic movements. You can also get planets ignite to develop cometary tails. You can get the sun change its color and all kinds of weird effects. And all these things occur when special rare planetary conjunctions occur. Now, things like the Carrington event in 1859, that was triggered by a special planetary conjunction. I've got snapshots of it somewhere, And again, it involves a four-body alignment involving Saturn, Mars, and Venus and the Sun. And then you've got the Earth, Mercury, I think, somewhere offset. And it all triggered on 28th of August, 1859, heightened the activity. The planets just shifted, and I think it was on the 1st of September, 18 minutes 11. So 18 hours 11 minutes is when the CME event occurred, just following the solar flare thing, and that was triggered by a celestial conjunction. So when I started looking at Atlas, I could see that a lot of people looking at how close it was getting. Just looking at the applet that people are showing you, it gets really close to Mars, really close to Jupiter, and I thought, how close? So I went to JPL's site and I looked at all these distances of closest approach. And I couldn't believe it. I'm looking at all the sequences of values and I was saying, they look practically random when you just view them in, say, in terms of an astronomical unit. But when you view them and you express them in statute miles, they've got all these sequences that begin like 108 or 126, 18 million or whatever, and 3333 and all. And I'm thinking, these numbers are so familiar to me. And when you look at the ratios connecting them up, again, it's something for all your viewers to just ponder, just stand back and stare at those figures I've shown you and just look carefully at them and ask yourself, would a random object just like coming into the solar system have all of these ratios of like 6-to-1, 7-to-1, with such high precision at the closest approach points to the planets and the sun, and ratios that begin sequences like with 3-6 and 3-2? There's no way that this object has got some kind of random trajectory. No way. And when you study these distances and then you start looking at the radiuses of the core of the sun and of the earth, and you start looking at the ratios between some of these critical distances connecting solar flares, when you see these ratios like 4/5, and things like that, and 3.6 as a sequence, these connections are extremely powerful. They're very suggestive. I can totally understand why some people would be thinking that a solar flare could be triggered by Atlas 3I. I do think it is a probe of some sort. I think it is actively scanning all of the planets. It's like it's pinging them. It's like, again, not of the electromagnetic spectrum, but it's firing beams of energy as it gets close to them and causing resonant agitation. It may have caused earthquakes for all we know on Venus that so far, obviously, we'd never know it, but it could have already done that, or it could have done it on Mars. We wouldn't really know this. You know what I'm saying?
Why would it do that to create these earthquakes?
I don't think, this is the thing, I don't think that necessarily it's doing this to just cause destruction. I think this is effectively a scan. It's a resonant agitation. It is a means of scanning, probing a system and seeing how it behaves. And I do think it's an unmanned probe, this Atlas 3I, because if you think about it, as I said, it's got to have been in our solar system, at least from the outer edges, and it's going to continue on for a few decades. Why would it remain here? If this was some fast-moving ship, it could play, like warp speed, whatever, fly to each planet, do a scan, next one, scan, couple of days, and it's gone. But it's not doing that. It's deciding, hey, we're going to stay in this solar system here for a few decades. Why? Because it's actively monitoring the solar system. That has to be its mission. It's monitoring it for a duration. Like when we monitor something in a long-term study, you know what I mean? We're doing some scientific study that lasts decades or whatever. It's obviously monitoring the planets and whatever for energetic changes. And I personally think that, I talk about cycles of destruction. I think that there are a few critical dates of interest up and coming where we may have a major, global catastrophe like of the ancient times, because there's certain special planetary alignments that are up and coming. And I wonder if its presence in the solar system might ultimately be tied into that, to some of these great Earth changes. So it needs to be here for a few decades just for them to play out. That's just a theory, though.
No, okay. And November 3rd is one of those dates that you theorize there could be a big event take place, or you're thinking that because of the location of Atlas, 3I Atlas?
Yes. Okay. The critical dates are, the first one is the 29th of October, 11 hours, 44 minutes. That's the optimized time when it reaches its closest approach to the sun. And I think, could it trigger either a solar flare, a massive solar flare at that time, or even an earthquake at that time because of the affinity to the Earth? So that's the first date, 29th of October, 1144. The second date is just a few days later, the 3rd of November, 5 hours, 56 minutes, universal time. That is the time when Atlas 3I gets the closest approach to Venus. But at that same time, that distance between Atlas 3I and the Earth is highly significant in and of itself. It ties in ratio-wise 4/5 to the 1.9, the earthquake, the X-flare, I think it was the X-flare one, that 4/5 ratio I showed you, yeah? It strongly implies that there's something going on here, that it links together. And you're thinking, 3rd November, 5:56 universal time, could we either again on that date have a major solar flare or some major earthquake? The mathematics is highly suggestive. I admit it's the kind of studies that, to me, it's something I'm all too familiar with. But this area of physics, and maybe a lot of your viewers, they might not have come across a lot of this work. It is pretty esoteric and niche, the kind of work I do. If you're familiar with works from Bruce Cathy, you might well understand exactly where I'm coming from straight away, because he's one of my heroes. I've got quite a few of his books on my bookshelf. But if it's not something you're familiar with, you'd need to maybe step back and look more carefully at it. This is why the proof is a kind of a technical one. It's a precise technical proof, and it does require a lot of thinking about, because I couldn't come on here and say, hey, it could suggest, it could trigger an earthquake or a solar flare without no mathematics backing it up. You got to have a ton of mathematics backing this kind of thing up. Otherwise, you're just guessing like crazy. But when you think about what that Avi Loeb guy said, some guy told him he's doing stock options on the timing of when it gets to, when Atlas 3I gets to some 29th or whatever. And you're thinking, you wonder whether the elites, if you will, have done the same kind of calculations that I've done and are aware of some of these dates, that they are dates of concern,
There's got to be supercomputers that they're using and calculations. And I'll bet you they have all sorts of technology that's tracking this thing right now. And there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And I wouldn't be... Professor Loeb did mention the possibility of there being a black swan type event if 3I Atlas did this change in trajectory when it comes back around the sun. And I think you did a pretty good job explaining it there in that amount of time, in just a few minutes. And I think that's much appreciated. I may have to take that part and put it at the front of the podcast so we can, because that connected a lot of dots for me. So I appreciate that. Let's get in a few questions here from some of our audience, if that's okay, because we've got some great questions. And Craig says, is Atlas headed for Earth's orbit?
No. And I don't believe it will change its orbit, as a matter of fact, because it's obviously got to go on to get to Jupiter. And remember that 33 million or 3331, yeah? It's making sure that it has it's picked like an optimum trajectory to come all the way through the solar system, so that each point of closest approach to the planets, they're all very specially configured. And I think it's got a mission that it's not going to deviate from. There's even ratios, although I didn't discuss Uranus and Neptune, there's even ratios that connect up Uranus and Neptune to some of these planets. And its closest approach to Uranus, I believe, is April the 1st, 2027. I do not believe this object is going to deviate from its path. It has picked a single trajectory, and it's going through, and it's going to maintain its course. I don't believe there's going to be any changes to its orbit. And the interesting thing about that is, and again, I was watching some guy was talking about the orbit, like comparing it to things like even Hale-Bopp and that Amorum, that one that you can't pronounce, that one. And he was talking about how, that could be it, when you get an object coming to the solar system, like Comet Hale-Bopp, I'm just trying to think about what the numbers were, but when you first sighted it, it had an orbital period. The solution was, I don't know, a couple of thousand miles or whatever. But because it interacts with the solar system, it ended up dynamically transforming its orbit so that it goes out, and I think it's now on an orbital period of about 4,000 years. 4,000 years. It came in at about 2,000, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But when objects come in, they can be influenced by, you know, the gravity and whatever, and it can change their you know, their direction and whatever. And there was a guy who was talking about Atlas 3I and saying that even though it's got an object, you know, a trajectory that's coming in hyperbolic, he says that it's hardly changing at all. It's maintaining it. But here's the thing: if this object began at the outer edge of the solar system, like, and you gave it, say, a single impulse and let, you know, gravity do the work, and its trajectory was just like doing that, what this guy was saying is it would end up deviating and getting changed. But in order for it to be on the trajectory it's on, it's got to be actively maintaining, through some propulsion system, maintaining this smooth object to ensure that it does not deviate naturally. Do you know what I mean? This is what this guy was saying. I'm not an expert myself. I'm just kind of citing somebody else, but he was basically saying that what seems to be like some, you know, natural just drifting, you know, or trajectory, it's actually one that has to be actively maintained in some way. So I thought that was fascinating, what that other researcher was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this question is from Arjun. What is your take on temples around, including Angkor Wat, Thailand, stories from Mahabharata and the Ramayana, India, etc.? I think he's referring to some of the ancient texts that describe certain, what we would consider like science fiction almost, you know, spaceships, space travel, the technologies themselves. Is there, I think he's asking if there's some type of connection possibly between the two and 3i Atlas.
I don't know about any connection to 3i Atlas. The only thing about Angkor Wat, I remember Graham Hancock mentioned it a while back. I've got some of his books. I mean, you know, I think he did a documentary, Heaven's Mirror, and he was talking about that. Did he link it to one at Constellations? I can't remember. As far as Mahabharata, not that familiar with it. I only remember some interesting commentaries about some of the battles that were going on, and the way that they talk about, you know, I'm unleashing this ultimate weapon on somebody. And wasn't there stories in Mahabharata about people being affected in such a way that they all had to take their clothes off and wash themselves? And the people suggesting it's like radioactive contamination, some of these weapons. So I've got no problem at all believing it. I do think that in ancient times we did have nuclear weapons used. I think there's some blast effects, you know, from things like that. I do think that going back a few thousand years, we did have, you know, nuclear weapons used in ancient wars. I've got no problem at all believing that. I don't know particulars though.
Appreciate that. I'm just going through some of the comments here. Has Keith seen this chat? Well, he's looking at it now. Thumbs up, everybody. Kat says, so can't it just be a new sort of comet we have found? Why does it need to be alien intelligence? I mean, what would you say to that?
Well, as I said to you, it's the order, the precision of its orbit. I mean, when we think about random orbits, we think this is something you should not find these ratios, as I've demonstrated here, to such precision, connecting up closest points of approach to all the bodies. You would never find these if it was just a random object, you know what I mean? And the other thing is a consideration about the orbit having to maintain itself. It does seem to absolutely be some kind of, for me, a probe. Now, maybe the people who are looking at the object itself can say more about that aspect of it, you know, the composition. I'm looking at the trajectory, but I do think that the trajectory, the hyperbolic trajectory and its closeness to the planets is what reveals its mission. It's scanning all the planets in turn. It's stimulating them through resonance. What may be a scientific scan in its, you know, from its mindset, if you want to put it that way, but it's the kind of thing that can actually trigger seismic activity and solar flare. Do you know what I mean? It's like, would the aliens care? You know, are they willing to just ping the sun and say, oh yeah, that was the energy required to get that solar flare thing? Yeah, I'll just record that on my chart. You know what I mean? But we're thinking like, hey, if it did that and a CME it to us, we'll be kind of screwed, you know? Right. You just wonder what is the mindset here. And I think it's unmanned, personally speaking. But I do think it is conducting a scan, but it's a question of what is the intent and what intensity is it going to be doing these scans. And are these dates I've mentioned potentially critical dates? I mean, as I said, it is speculative. I personally think they're absolutely viable dates for triggering X-class flares or earthquakes are viable. Whether they will be taken advantage of, that's the question, you know. But all will be revealed, you know.
So I was wondering if there's a place in Vegas where we could put some, you know, place some bets on November 3rd, because I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it. I would totally bet on that just because. But anyway, that's for a whole other podcast. Folks, let me know. Just joking. But I do have Sportsbook, but I don't think you can do that on Sportsbook. I didn't see anything for EQs or solar flares. You know what? We should do a follow-up. We should definitely do a follow-up. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, to say, I mean, I never mentioned the Earth's closest approach to the sun. I'm still looking into that one. The relations I got there were not as, dare I say, impressive as these here. But there's a few things I'm still looking at there. I'm just having to test a few things. Only ideas that have only come to me recently, just last day or two, in fact. But yeah, it's I don't mind doing a follow-up. But we'll have to see if anything happens like on 29th at 3rd, you know, to see.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I'd be honored to do a follow-up with you, and it'd be great to see what your information is in the very near future. And folks, I did want to also show off the website one more time that you need to go to. Check it out. Lost Age Secrets, and some great information on here. And then also down here, if you want to get the Lost Age of Cosmic Harmony or Ancient Megaliths, Covert Military Bases, and Nuclear Weapons, boom, just click this right here. And I must verify that I am human. It's always asking me that. I wonder why. Reptilian shapeshifters. We're not all bad, folks. Some of us are vegan. Not saying that I am, but anyway, just joking. But this is the website, and then payhip.com if you wanted to get Ancient Megaliths, Covert Military Bases, Nuclear Weapons, the Lost Age of Cosmic Harmony, like $3. Are you serious? Sign me up, dude. I'm gonna get both of them, and then we'll have 2 3s, and then people can call me.
It's £3. It's because I'm in Britain, you know. But I think exchange rate is at 1.35.
We're close.
Yeah, it's close.
Somebody asked if you're a card counter. Are you a card counter?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
You'd be good at it, man. But don't tell us if you are, though, because then if you do come to Vegas, they won't let you in the casinos.
No, I rarely leave Barnsley in mind, England, you know.
Right on, man. Hey, super appreciated, Keith. Thank you very much. I'm so glad you reached out to me. And folks, guess what? He stayed up until like 2:20 a.m. right now. Yeah. So thanks, Keith. Anything else you want to share with us before we finish this up?
No, I don't think. We'll always have to see if them dates, if anything happens. You know, as I said, it is speculative, but I genuinely wonder if something might happen. If it does, it should be closely tied to those timestamps on the days in question. That'd be the thing that'd really nail it. But
that's what I really respect about you is you're saying, hey, we're speculating this right now. Yeah. This is pure theory, pure hypothesis, versus some people that come out with dates and then, you know, they're like, dude, the rapture is really going to happen this September 23rd. I know last year it was supposed to happen the year before, but this year it's really going to be September 23rd.
I could talk a hell of a lot about Revelation and the Bible, I'll tell you. Oh, yes.
Nice. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Have a beautiful day. Hit the bell. Be well. Claudette says, great information. Thank you. And keep being the change the world needs to see, everybody. Thank you very much.
All right.